The words hung in the air, sharp and brittle, like shards of glass. You think you deserve more? After everything we've done for you? My father's voice, usually booming and full of self-importance, was now tinged with a saccharine disbelief. My mother, beside him, offered a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile she reserved for distant relatives or when she was about to deliver a carefully crafted slight. They were sitting across from me at the familiar oak dining table, the same table where I'd endured countless meals punctuated by their veiled criticisms and passive-aggressive manipulations. The afternoon sun, usually a cheerful presence, seemed to cast long, accusatory shadows across the polished surface. This wasn't the first time I'd felt the familiar weight of their disapproval, the subtle ways they made me feel less than, but this felt different. This felt like a calculated accusation, a deliberate attempt to frame my needs as demands, my survival as an insult. My childhood, looking back, was a study in carefully managed deprivation. Not of food, not in the literal sense, but of validation, of encouragement, of the simple acknowledgement that I was a person with my own nascent desires and dreams. The house was always immaculate, filled with expensive, yet sterile, furniture. Every object had its place, every conversation followed a script. My mother prided herself on her control, her ability to curate their lives into a perfect tableau for the outside world. My father, a successful lawyer, echoed her sentiments, his pronouncements often delivered with the finality of a courtroom verdict. They instilled in me a deep-seated sense of obligation, a constant hum of gratitude that I was allowed to exist within their pristine, ordered universe. The trust fund, established by my paternal grandparents, a forgotten legacy from a time when they'd actually shown affection, was a constant topic of conversation, though never one of my benefit. It was always about foresight, careful management, and implicitly, how was a burden they were graciously tolerating. I remember one particular incident. I must have been around 16. I'd expressed a mild interest in attending a different college than the one they'd pre-selected, a decision that had clearly been made without consulting me, based on prestige and proximity to their social circle. My mother's reaction was swift and chilling. She didn't yell. Instead, she sat me down, her face a mask of weary martyrdom. "We've made so many sacrifices for you," she'd sighed, her gaze drifting to the expensive artwork on the wall. "We've given you everything. And this is how you repay us? By being difficult?" The implication was clear: my desires were ungrateful, a betrayal of their immense generosity. They controlled the purse strings, doling out funds for necessities with a grudging reluctance, always reminding me of their magnanimity. Small purchases, like a new book or a modest piece of clothing, required detailed justifications, submitted as if for an audit. The trust fund itself, a substantial sum meant to ensure my security and independence, was held by them, a silent testament to their power. Then came the day, the one etched into my memory with an almost cinematic clarity. It was a Tuesday, the air thick with an unseasonably warm autumn humidity. I'd scheduled an appointment to discuss my current financial situation, a euphemism for the ongoing battle to access funds I was entitled to. I needed to invest in some specialized equipment for my fledgling design business, a venture I'd poured all my limited resources and considerable energy into. I'd meticulously prepared a proposal, detailing the projected returns and the necessity of the purchase. I'd arrived at their home, the impeccably manicured lawn a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within me. They were waiting, perched on the edge of the sofa, their posture radiating a familiar blend of authority and entitlement. "We've reviewed your request," my father began, his tone devoid of warmth. "And we've decided against it." My stomach plummeted. "Against it? Why?" "I've shown you the projections," my mother interrupted, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "Darling, you're being frivolous. These are serious times. We can't have you throwing away good money on hobbies." The word hobbies landed like a slap. My nascent career, my passion, reduced to a childish pastime. "It's not a hobby," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It's my future. And I have a right to use my trust fund for it." My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Your trust fund? You seem to forget, young lady, that we are the trustees. We decide what is best." And what's best is for you to be sensible, to not take foolish risks. We've decided to allocate those funds elsewhere. For now. He let the words hang, a deliberate, agonizing pause. Elsewhere? I managed to choke out. Yes, my mother confirmed, her gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. We've decided to invest it in something more stable. Something that will actually grow. The implication was a thunderclap. They hadn't just refused, they had unilaterally made a decision about my money, without consultation, without explanation, and with a casual dismissiveness that reeked of betrayal. I looked from one to the other, searching for any flicker of understanding, any hint of remorse. There was none. Only a smug self-satisfaction, the kind that comes from believing you are impeccably right, even when you are utterly wrong. The room felt suddenly suffocating, the air thick with their unspoken pronouncements of my inadequacy. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. The carefully constructed facade of civility had crumbled, revealing the cold, hard edifice of their control. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet determination. The sting of their betrayal had morphed into a cold, steady resolve. I didn't confront them further, didn't engage in shouting matches or tearful appeals. Instead, I began to meticulously sift through the original trust documents, the ones my grandmother had painstakingly drafted years ago. I'd always assumed they were mere formalities, quaint relics of a bygone era. But as I pored over the legal jargon, a slow understanding dawned. My grandmother, perhaps sensing the inherent control issues within her own son, had included specific clauses, safeguards designed to protect the beneficiary from exactly this. I discovered a clause that stipulated that at the age of 30, the beneficiary had the right to petition for full control of the trust's assets, provided they could demonstrate financial literacy and a responsible plan for their management. I was 29. I also found a clause related to trustee accountability, which outlined penalties for mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. The key was the word accountability. I spent hours in the local law library, not consulting a lawyer, but learning the law myself. I studied case precedents, understanding the legal framework they operated within. I documented every instance of their control, every questionable decision, every delay in fund disbursement. I gathered statements, invoices, and meticulously organized my own financial records, showcasing the steady, if slow, progress of my design business. I didn't seek revenge, I sought rectification. I sought to reclaim what was rightfully mine. On my 30th birthday, I didn't expect a grand celebration from them. I received a card with a generic birthday message and a small, prepaid gift card to a department store, the kind they'd given me every year since I turned 18. It felt like a final, condescending insult. Later that evening, I drove to their house. The lights were on, the television a low murmur. I walked to the front door, not with anger, but with a profound sense of finality. I didn't knock. I simply let myself in. They were in the living room, my mother scrolling through her phone, my father engrossed in the news. They looked up, startled by my presence. "Oh, it's you," my mother said, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "What do you want now?" My father merely grunted, his eyes returning to the screen. I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the center of the room, the same room where I'd endured so many of their pronouncements. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. It was a petition for the transfer of trust assets, along with a detailed affidavit outlining their breach of fiduciary duty. I placed it on the coffee table, directly between them. My father's gaze finally snapped to it. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing its usual calm. "It's a petition," I said, my voice steady and clear. "To have you removed as trustees and for the trust assets to be transferred to my sole control." My mother dropped her phone. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her face draining of color. "I am," I replied, meeting my father's furious gaze. "And I have the documentation to prove your mismanagement and disregard for the trust's purpose. The law is quite clear on these matters." I watched their faces, the initial shock quickly morphing into disbelief, then dawning horror. My father's jaw tightened, his face reddening. My mother's practiced composure shattered, replaced by a raw, unadulterated panic. The smugness, the entitlement, the unwavering belief in their own superiority, it all began to crumble. The moment their eyes registered the weight of the document, the legal weight of my carefully constructed case, the realization hit them. The judge's order, when it came, was swift and decisive. The transfer was executed, the penalties levied. Their faces, the last time I saw them in court, were a study in utter defeat. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, bewildered shame. The aftermath was, as I predicted, a predictable storm. Frantic calls from my mother, her voice a desperate, high-pitched whine, accusing me of greed, of betrayal, of destroying the family. Texts from my father, terse and furious, threatening legal repercussions that he knew were baseless. Flying monkeys, as they're sometimes called, emerged from the woodwork, aunts and uncles, distant cousins, all eager to relay my parents' fabricated narrative of my wickedness. They pleaded, they guilt-tripped, they tried to manipulate me back into their orbit of control. But I didn't respond. I had cut the ties, not with anger, but with a quiet, surgical precision. The financial security I had always been denied was now mine, not a gift, but a hard-won entitlement. I invested wisely, grew my business, and finally began to live without the constant weight of their approval or disapproval. The social consequences for them were immediate and profound. Their carefully constructed world, built on appearances and perceived status, began to unravel. The news of their removal as trustees, coupled with the whispers of their financial mismanagement, did not go unnoticed in their insular social circles. Their once coveted invitations dried up. The whispers turned into outright ostracization. They were no longer the arbiters of taste and success, but cautionary tales. Their faces, etched with a desperate attempt to maintain dignity, were a constant reminder of the fall they had taken. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic pronouncements of justice. Just a quiet, steady dismantling of their power. The silence that followed their downfall was the most satisfying sound of all. It was the sound of my own freedom, echoing in the space where their control used to reside.